So it looks like we might have some new MacBooks around the corner, and they might even launch as early as next week at WWDC, which is in a couple of days. But I want to talk about the hardware specs, like some of the stuff that's been rumored, but I also want to talk about the significance of this stuff. Like, what does it really mean for the consumer, even for people that aren't interested in buying a high-end M1X based MacBook? So I want to start off with the design first. There's a lot of renders that are floating around. These ones in particular were done by Ian Zelbo. He has a bunch of really nice renders of Apple products on his Twitter page. I'll link it down below. But the new MacBook Pro supposedly has the return of MagSafe, it has an SD card slot, an HDMI port, and the keyboard supposedly has no more touch bar, but it still retains the Touch ID interface. But the real stuff, the significant stuff, is on the inside. So on the current generation of M1 MacBook Pros, we're running an 8-core CPU with an 8-core GPU. It's a good performer, a really good performer if you take into account power draw, but its main strength has always been power efficiency, the ability to deliver good performance for the amount of energy that it uses. But right from day one, it's had a weakness. The graphical performance of M1 has been just okay, nothing particularly special. Now, Mark Gurman from Bloomberg has reported on a couple things in regards to this upcoming Apple Silicon, potentially called M1X. Number one, it's got a 10-core CPU instead of the 8-core that we saw in M1. But the second thing, the way more important thing to me, the way more interesting thing to me, is the GPU. It's going to come in either a 16-core GPU variant or, at the top end, a 32-core GPU variant. Now, every year when AMD or NVIDIA brings out a new GPU, it's like 8, maybe 10% better than the previous year. On some really good years, it's going to be like 15%, which is very rare. But it's because there's just limitations to what you can do with graphics, discrete graphics, in a laptop, right? It's a limited space in there. You have to think about power considerations. You have to take thermal issues into consideration. There's like a lot of stuff that limits what you can do with the graphical capabilities in a laptop. It's just the nature of a small package that is powerful. Apple Silicon is a completely different beast. It's an SoC, right? So you can package your GPU cores along with your PCIe lanes, with your unified memory. You can stick all of that together, and you have this device that's extremely energy efficient and high performance. So there's a couple things I want to talk about. Number one is size. So if you look at the die shot of M1, it's a 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU, and it's a very small package. But because this is now going to be a 16-core GPU, supposedly, that package is invariably going to be larger. And it's not just the extra GPU cores, there's a few more of the high-performance CPU cores, there's the extra memory, plus the components to be able to bump up the memory bandwidth to make all this work. These new chips are going to be bigger, and that's just for the 16-core GPU variant. The 32-core GPU variant is going to be noticeably bigger than what M1 was in terms of the die size. The other thing, though, is power draw. So M1 has been incredibly energy efficient, like just weirdly energy efficient. These new chips are going to need a lot more power than M1, and they're going to give off more heat, and they're going to need like beefier thermal solutions than what we saw with the M1 products. And I wouldn't be surprised if they need bigger batteries to be able to maintain a respectable battery life, which is why I wouldn't be surprised if you could only get that 32-core variant in the 16-inch model with the space for a big enough battery and the space for a more appropriate cooling solution, because 32-core GPU it's significant. Now, when you think about performance, M1's graphical performance was similar to, I don't know, like a GTX 1650. Not quite, but similar enough to a 1650. If you look at what double the GPU core count would do, that'd probably bring it up to probably like the 5500M, like what you see in the 16-inch MacBook Pro available right now, like the Intel variant. But on the top end, the 32-core GPU, I think that is the product that's going to blow people away in terms of performance. It's going to push out amazing performance while still being a relatively low wattage compared to any of the traditional discrete GPU solutions. Like if you compared that 32-core GPU to anything from NVIDIA or AMD or Intel, if you want to bring them into it, you cannot get that type of GPU performance unless you have it all into an SoC like Apple's doing it. It's going to be pretty cool. So there's one other thing I want to touch on. Pricing. So I've said before in previous videos that the M1 products are very difficult to beat in terms of the competition, the MacBook lineup, right? And it boils down to price. This is a roughly $1,000 product, like the 13-inch model, and it's hard to get that type of performance from any kind of Windows-based laptop, at least not one that competes with it in just like overall package. But when it comes to these new M1X things, I have a feeling that Apple's going to charge a large sum of money for this stuff. It's because they can, right? When you have a product that's geared towards a professional demographic, it's geared for people that they're using it for their careers, they're using it to make money, right? Apple, when it comes to this type of product, they usually charge a hefty price for it, it's just the Apple way. So I think this is one of the reasons why over the past year, that's a lie, because this hasn't been out for a year. For the past 6 months, I've been very comfortable recommending picking up an M1 now, even like days before M1X potentially launches. It's cool to pick up M1 because this stuff is reasonably priced, but M1X, or whatever they end up calling it, I think that will be some very expensive hardware. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thumbs if you liked it, subs if you loved it. See you guys next time.